so.
We're doing it live. Fuck it. We're doing it live. I think it's hard to tell at this point whether it's live or it's DOA.
What.
That's just how it goes, I suppose. Right? Hey, maybe it's working. Hey, are we? We are doing it live. All right. Hey, check it out, Shannon.
Are we up? We
figured it out. We have made it happen. And now we are finally here on our quarterly live hangout with our Patreon supporters at patreon.com/glassboxpod. I'm Bryce Blankenagel. That is Shannon Grover over there. Shannon, what are we doing today instead of Qing and Aing?
Oh my God, we're going to talk about Under the Banner of Heaven. Holy shit. God.
We got a bit of a stream ahead of us today, don't we?
Yes, we do. We binge watched that over the last 2 days, and that's been fascinating. So, yeah. Oh my God.
So, okay, I'm going to work on getting a post up for our patrons over at patreon.com/glassboxpod for them to join us, and they can join us midstream. And if they want to come hang out live with us and maybe chime in with their thoughts about Under the Banner of Heaven and whatnot, then y'all can do that. Glassbox Podcast Patreon page. Sign up for as little as $1 an episode. That's a couple bucks a month. If you'd like, or follow the link in the description below, and you can find us there as well. Shannon, why don't you give viewers a bit of a precursor on what Under the Banner of Heaven is, an overall view, the Lafferty murders, everything. And I'm going to try and work out some technical kinks while I'm at it over here.
All right, there we go. So for those of you who don't know, which of our listeners will be very few, but Under the Banner of Heaven is by Jon Krakauer. It's a book by him that was published in 2003, but it's about the Lafferty murders that happened in American Fork, Utah in 1984. Ron and Dan Lafferty murdered their sister-in-law, Brenda, and her 15-month-old baby, Erica. And it was done in a ritualistic style that harks back to Mormonism. And the book covers the history of it, not only of what led Ron and Dan to do this, but also about the religion itself. And it goes into the history of it, with the story with Joseph Smith, the story with Brigham Young, and things like that, what led to several of the fundamentalist groups breaking off and doing their thing. I remember when I read it, because this is 20 years ago, but when I read it, that's when I started to learn more about the fundamentalist stuff, which I understand it's relatively accurate on those. There are some flaws in it in the book, but the mini series, it's a 7-part series put on Hulu. The last episode is an hour and a half, but the rest of them are only an hour. But it goes into the story of Ron and Dan with flashes back to Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. And that is also a very important one for me, because I was in high school at American Fork High School at the time that all this happened. And I do remember the feeling of what was going on. The two of them, they lived in my stake. And the stake president talked about in the miniseries, Richard Stowe was my stake president. He's the one that signed my temple recommend interview, helped me get ready for the temple when I went. And also when I went on my mission, he was the mission president. So it was kind of a thing there that I remember all this. One of his daughters, Ron's daughter, was a year older than me. She was at my high school. I knew who she was. We weren't exactly friends. We were friends with people who were friends with each other, kind of thing, and that kind of thing. But yeah, this happened in my backyard, literally. So almost literally. So anyway, this was a big deal, but it's something that had a massive effect on Mormonism itself. And I personally think this is part of what led the church to take the penalties out of the covenants made at the temple when you went through for the endowment stuff. So that's my personal opinion there, but yeah. Because this happened in 1984, the penalties finally got removed in 1990. Yeah, so that's basically, I mean, it's a big deal in Mormonism, in Utah Mormonism, but what it also does is it shows what Utah Mormons were like. And it a lot of flashbacks for me back to high school. And there was so much, I was like, yeah, that was correct. Yep, that was exactly correct. Yep, that was correct too. That was all right.
So I'm
yeah.
so glad that we are able to like do this together, because you and I obviously had very different like childhoods in the church. Like different with different generations. So I have like some thoughts and some questions and some things I want to explore with you that the show depicted about the church in the 80s that I didn't, I wasn't there for. But I felt like as we were watching it, I felt like quite a few of the things were quite authentic that they showed. So maybe we can tease apart some of that and discuss how the culture itself was depicted, because I think for a lot of Mormons and a lot of ex-Mormons watching it, that was maybe the most important thing about this show, was how authentic does it feel. So I want to get your thoughts on that as some overall assessment. How did they do in your opinion, Shannon?
I feel like they really depicted it well. I know there was a lot of objections where at the beginning of the first episode, you see the detective out there on his lawn and his little girls wearing pioneer dresses. But I was like, it was Pioneer Day. July 24th is the day that Brigham Young was supposed to have entered Salt Lake Valley. It's a big holiday, state holiday. It's more important to Utah than the 4th of July is. That parades happen all the time in your little towns. You'd be out there on your bike that you wove crepe paper through the wheels and made your own streamers to put on handles. And you wore a pioneer dress and you had a homemade bonnet on and all that shit. So this is typical. This was all typical. The language used, all of it. And I can promise any Native American we saw, we called them Lamanites then. And it's used all throughout this. And we did that then because we saw it as, oh, this is being respectful to them, which it's not, but yeah.
I mean, that was also like the height of the Indian placement program, the Lamanite placement program that they had. And like, it was hot in the culture. It seems like something the church has definitely walked away from since then. God. Right?
It was a big, we had them in every grade in my high school. They were in pretty much everybody's ward. We always had 3 or 4 in our ward, that kind of thing. Yeah. It was all the time. Yeah. All of that. So yeah, I just felt like I was right back in high school. And every time they do these opening shots, because I mean, they said it, they called it East Rockwell. It was in American Fork, and the shots of the town, the sky shots that they would show growing in, that was American Fork. There's one point I was like, I think that's where my house is. Which wasn't built then, but that's okay.
All right. So they had to film this, most of this in Utah, but it's set in the 80s. So they had to, it seems like they had to put the murders down in not American Fork for that reason, because it was like they actually happened in American Fork when it looked very different than it looks today. Right. So that's kind of interesting that they negotiated that by just kind of creating like it just changing the setting for where the murders actually occurred.
I couldn't help but wonder how much was that the city of American Fork didn't want to let him do it here or something. I don't know. It's hard to say. But I think the police station that it would have been in, I think there's been a new one built since then, and the old one is gone, so they couldn't even use the old police station. I'm not totally sure though. That's not something I really paid attention to as a high schooler.
Right on. Well, this is actually a good question for kind of overall as well in the history of the time. And Rick, you're here on the call as well, and I know that you lived through all of this as well. Maybe you can help with this. But Tyler joined us here, asked in the YouTube comments, was it a nationwide story at the time or more of something that only Mormons were interested in?
I don't remember, actually. I didn't pay attention that much. What do you know, Rick?
I didn't pay as much attention as I should, being Mormon background. I was probably more aware of it than the average
Right.
public was. But I think the high points probably hit the national news. I honestly don't remember.
It very likely
brain's
did,
going.
because they did cross states. They arrested Ron and Dad in Vegas or Reno, I guess it was. But I mean, it was a horrific murder, and especially it being tied into the fundamentalism, Mormon fundamentalism would have made it a more of a big news report. But yeah, that's just wasn't, people didn't want to talk about it around us kids, because they're like, the things I remember hearing were, oh no, they killed him. It was kind of like the temple, but there's kids here, we can't talk about it, that kind of thing. And so that's the other problem that we ran into with it. Yeah, I just remember everyone terrified of it. And it was my stake. I mean, like I said, Dad knew Ron Lafferty and was really happy that he was not in our ward because he found him really creepy. So yeah. Yeah,
It's close to home.
it's really close to home. Yeah. His daughter Debbie was a year older than me, and there's a lot of things I remember, and there was with her, I seem to think I tied in this one memory of her with when the murders happened, but I don't think it happened then, because she wasn't even, I don't think they were in the state at the time of the murders. But Diana and the kids, I think that's how they had it in here. But my advisor in Young Women's, her daughter, she had a daughter a year older than me, and she was friends with Debbie Lafferty, and Debbie was there at the house at one point when we went over for Young Women thing. And Debbie was on the phone on the back porch talking to her mom, and she was just crying, saying, Mom, I want to be with you, not here. I don't want to be here by myself. I want to be with you. And there was just this, oh, well, there's something wrong with their dad. There's something going on with their dad. And that was about it. And so, but I think what happened is that was probably before when Diane first left Ron and took the kids. And so I think that's what happened there. But at any rate, I just remember it's tied in my memory to when all of this happened, which I think covered about a year, all of the events of it leading up to it, them going really weird and then Diana leaving and all that shit. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's the one thing I wish they'd done better of in the miniseries, is showed when each thing was happening. Yeah.
How do you mean, like the sequence of events, or do you
mean
like,
because there's stuff they talked about, and then later there was a couple times like Jeb would say, was this before or after this happened? And then, but I was like, I wish the timeline of Ron and Dan and all of their descent into the shittiness, that they would at least have given time and timeline on it as they were showing it, the dates or whatever. But then again, I guess they wanted the viewers as confused as the detectives were as they were going through. I don't know.
Yeah, Tyler makes a good comment. I felt that I got the general vibe of the timeline by how long their beards were, as funny as that might seem. And that was actually something I think that you and I discussed, was especially Ron, as Ron descended down the pathway towards zealot madness. His hair became more disheveled, longer. He started parting it and doing it differently. And then he grew out the mustache, and then he started growing out the beard. Like, we saw the progression of time, kind of, a multiple months period, just by the changing hairstyles of all of the Lafferty clan. Yeah. That was kind of interesting too.
And how they dressed too.
Yes. Yeah. How they dressed. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we obviously, this is a very spoiler heavy broadcast, right? So if you haven't seen it, or if you're you're spoiler averse like me, cut it off here.
And absolutely nothing about what actually happened.
that too, right? That's the trouble when you're basing a fiction off of actual events. Is like, if you know the story, then you know where we're going with all of it, right? But we're going to be talking some nitty gritty of the actual series, as well as some of the like artistic liberties, interpretations that were taken by the film creators, in order to achieve the point of telling this story in a cohesive and succinct timeline, 7 episodes. So yeah, if you don't want the spoilers, shut it off now, but we're going to launch into it. Shannon, you watched like all the episodes over the past couple days. I went to the first 2 episodes in Utah, and then we watched the rest of the episodes together. All right. And we also, because we're us, we have like 9 pages of notes. I mean, come on. I hear and see everybody collectively like, oh, groan, and some of y'all are laughing. I get it.
Well, you guys are like, yeah, this is Bryce and Shannon who will blather on forever. Yeah.
Like, and normally like these Q's and A's, like where we try and go like an hour and a half, more, 2 hours is like long, but our main, like our segments of the show, each individual segment is, usually 10 to 15 pages, and those can go 2 hours, and we don't have everybody else chiming in on the main segments of the show. So I suspect we might be here a little while, but we have some notes, we have some thoughts. Shannon, do you want to start us off with your thoughts on episode 1 and 2, and we can all just kind of chime in? Y'all just unmute, and if you want to chime in, if you want to say something, if you have thoughts that we don't bring up, or if you want to add to anything, or if you have questions, hey, just unmute and raise your hand or whatever, grab our attention. Let's get started with episode 1.
So with this one, well, for one, I thought the titles of the episodes were absolutely on point, especially because there's like layers of meaning to each title. But that one is called When God Was Love. And there's a couple things I got from it that I thought were overall points that were really good for the rest of the series. One of which is LDS women are taught to serve and to obey, always to obey. Actually, it's more than a couple. When Alan says to Detective Pyrie, if you think if you are that certain, you don't know anything. And that leads into the entire series right there, because he's saying you don't believe anything you've been taught because it's all wrong. And that Mormonism breeds dangerous men. And that is one of the most important points here, is because Mormonism does, from day one, it breeds dangerous men because it sets up this infallibility with the leadership. And then, if you're listening to God and God tells you to do something, then it's okay to do it, even if he's telling you to kill somebody, Nephi and Laban. So those were, and the Lafferty men blame the women every time something goes wrong. Yeah.
I felt like the first episode established the Lafferty family dynamic really well.
Right.
We got to see, and I'm just going to call them the matriarch and patriarch of the Lafferty clan. We got to see how they interacted with all their kids. We got to see how their kids interact with each other. We got to see the social pecking order of all of the sons. We got to see the like almost mafia wife aspect of the matriarch, how she was not just an enabler, but many times a driver, helping along and solidifying her husband's just iron-fisted control over the family. And that's established very early on. The patriarch of the family is a monster. He is an asshole. He is beating a dog to death because the boys didn't finish their chores. He is just the worst human being in this timeline.
Right.
No redeeming qualities whatsoever.
There's also a lot of subtleties in things like the clothing of women all throughout this. When you first see Brenda meeting the Lafferty women, every single one of them, I believe, was in a dress or a shirt and a blouse, except for Brenda. Possibly, I'm trying to remember if Diana was wearing pants or not, but I think nearly all of them were in dresses. But also, if you look at their faces, Brenda has a very clear, it's obvious makeup that is on her face, and the other women do not. And it sets her apart very clearly right from the beginning as somebody different, as bright, as intelligent, as a thinker, and not as necessarily somebody who obeys just because the man told her what to do. And so she will ask questions, those kind of things. There's a lot of that that's just very subtly setting it up.
um that was a theme that kept hitting over and over, that it was the woman's job to obey. You obey. And this keeps hitting over and over and over and over again. And it happens in different contexts within the various groups and people that we're seeing. And it's happening with the entire Lafferty clan. It's happening with the individual Lafferty boys and their wives. And then we also see it happening with Becca and Detective Pyrie, that a couple of times he pulls a priesthood card and says, you will not do that. And she has to obey her husband because he's the priesthood holder. And it's very jarring to see the different contexts of like the Pyrie family being like this, corporate Salt Lake City LDS good Mormon family, model family, and him using the same language, and Becca submitting to the same language the way that the more like iron-fisted Laffertys were. It's just degrees of the same exact thing, where the women are always subservient to their husbands. Really powerful point through the whole show.
Yes, it is.
Episode 2. Should we move on to episode 2 then?
Yeah. Mind your property gets said.
Mind your property. Right. This was titled Rightful Place.
Rightful Place.
And let's talk about the episode titles too.
Yeah. Going from when God was love, not God is love, but when God was love, to rightful place, meaning they don't, it means, yes, women need to be in their rightful place, which is very obvious all the way through this, as well as this episode, but that the Lafferty's rightful place is at the top. Whatever it is, but also within the Laffertys, whose is the rightful place, because this is the one where the father goes on the mission and decides to leave Dan in charge with Robin as his right-hand man, instead of Ron, who would be the expected one. But I think in Ammon's mind, the father's mind, Dan would be the easiest one to take control back from when he came home. Ronnie wouldn't be able to.
I thought that personality divide between Ron and Dan was really interesting.
It was.
And this is kind of an overall point that I think the filmmaker Dustin Lance Black was trying to drive home, was the parallels between Dan and Joseph Smith and Ron and Brigham Young here, because Dan is clearly like the visionary, hearing the voice of God, the charismatic that is able to unite the family. But at the end of the day, the patriarch of the Lafferty clan knows that Dan can be controlled. He can be steered. He can be, put in a certain direction. Whereas Ron is a businessman. He knows the ins and outs of how to do business, and he knows the logistics. He knows what needs to be done in order to accomplish X, Y, or Z end game. And I feel like we see, like with Dan, he's theoretical and he's talking about following through the will of the Lord, but then it's Ron who's responsible for pushing Dan into action to make those charismatic revelations actually true.
Yeah.
And I definitely see the parallels with Joseph Smith and Brigham Young there too.
Yeah. I found it really creepy when they showed the chiropractic scene with Dan, because I was like, I've never seen a chiropractor working on somebody's stomach. It's always at the back. I'm like, weren't they manipulating bones, not your organs? What the fuck was he doing? Oh my God. It's like, if that had been mine, I would have walked out too. But yeah, I was like, holy shit, what the hell is going on there? Oh my God. And yes, chiropractors are pretty woo. You're right there, Will. Oh God, yeah. But yeah, it's kicks right in on the misogyny again. Haughty women who don't know their place. Women need to know their place. And they also, this I like, is showing the real reason why Joseph Smith was tarred and feathered. Not because of what he was teaching, but because of where he's putting his dick. Yeah.
I have some thoughts about the various historical scenes that they chose to portray. And this is one of them that was like, it wasn't placed on the accurate spot on the timeline of Kirtland history, but it is an event that is mostly accurate to a reasonable interpretation of the documents. And I think that is acceptable to portray a historical event in such a way like this, that the people dragged Joseph Smith out of the house. They had a doctor there who lost his nerve, who was going to castrate Joseph, and how he lost his nerve, or what was said, or whatever. We can, the creator obviously took some artistic liberties there, but the overall events that he was philandering around with one of the teenage girls he was living with, that's a reasonable conclusion. So it portrayed that. It shows him getting tarred and feathered because of that. Awesome, great, cool. It's way better than just like there being, they were translating the Bible and these were Methodists who thought that was blasphemy.
Right. Tyler asked, wasn't there a property theft thing too involved with that, with the tar and feathering stuff?
I don't know if specifically with the tar and feathering. There could have been. It's been many years since I was doing the research for that, so I don't exactly remember off the top of my head. As far as I am aware, that was mostly just to do with the Johnson family.
Okay.
But wouldn't surprise me. Julie says in the comments, though, in the film, though, it talked about there was the property theft thing too, and I think that was more portrayed or depicted in the scene with the hanging of the dog, right?
Right.
The Ohioans were mad about how the Mormons were conducting their business, and because Joe had unpaid debts or had stolen property, that this was their payment that they took was his dog.
Yeah. And that was also an interesting scene, that they're saying once the dog gets a taste of the lamb, it won't go to anything else. But how true that is, I don't know. But on the other hand, what does that also imply about Joseph Smith himself? Once he gets a taste of this level of power, is he going to turn away from it? Is he going to do anything else but try to get more of this power? And that's what I felt like it was implying there, but also saying the same about Ron and Dan. I mean, it's foreshadowing them. A lot of it. There's so many layers all the way through this that is so fascinating to me. Yeah.
That was one thing I did appreciate actually with the show was I found it kind of jarring in the first episodes when they were making the parallels, and then they were just doing like the quick flash edits of like the different characters in the different timelines, that they were like very clearly drawing the parallels. Like when I started watching it, I was like, just leave me as the viewer to come to that conclusion. You don't have to hit me in the head with that conclusion that you're drawing the parallels. I see it already. You don't have to spoon feed it to me. However, I felt like as the series developed, those became less jarring and more just, okay, this is this filmmaker style. This is what he is doing in order to draw the parallels and drive it home, and maybe to illustrate parallels that we didn't see earlier.
Yeah.
And to make multiple levels of parallels of what's going on. So that was something that I was I was a little not happy with to begin, but as the series went, I mean, Shannon, you even like, we were watching it together. After the first few episodes we watched together, I was like, all right, I got problems, I'm not very pleased with this and these criticisms. But by like the last two episodes, I was like, damn, this is a good show. This is good.
Yeah, to me, I felt like the alternating back and forth between Joseph Smith and then was more of what was going on with Pyrie. And that these are the connections he's making as he's going through his faith crisis in the middle of all of this shit. And so that's one of the things. But also for any non-member watching it, these are parallels that do need to be seen. And so, somebody like you, Bryce, who's done this extensive 10-year of podcasting history on all of that stuff with it, you don't need it. No, you're going to already see the parallels. But to 98% of Mormon membership, they don't. to all of non-Mormons, except for historians who looked at that stuff. They don't see it either. And so that's why, for me, I thought it was actually good to have it there, because it shows, Pyrie making these observations is good for all of us to see. But yeah.
That was another thing that was really hard for me too, because like I read the book and then went to the premiere, like reread it, went to the premiere, and then came back and watched the episodes later. So like I know the historical events that they're portraying and the Lafferty story, and then to watch it, trying to put myself in the mind space of somebody who knows nothing about this, who this is a cold watch, that was a very hard thing for me to do. I feel like I need to watch it with somebody who knows nothing about it to be like, all right, see what they think, because I feel like they would see it maybe as less deliberate and less like ham-fisted of storytelling than us who know these stories already.
Right.
And also that was one of those things that I feel like the filmmaker did pretty well, was patterning the series after the book, because the book does jump the timelines. The book does cover the same historical events as are portrayed in the series, and it's in a similar way as the series, although the series is much faster. But the major events are depicted: the tarring and feathering, Hans Mill massacre, the Nauvoo expositor, and the Carthage assassinations, and then the Hans Mill massacre. Those are all events that
Mormon Meadows massacre, you mean? You said Hans Mill twice, but Mormon Meadows.
Mountain Meadows, sorry.
Or Mount Mills, whatever.
So I was impressed that the series was able to capture those same events and be able to draw the parallels in the same way that Jon Krakauer was doing so in the book, just doing so in much longer form and much more detailed kind of format. But it does contribute to the overall thesis that this, Mormonism breeds dangerous men.
Yeah. And Will put in a comment saying, I like that interpretation that it was for Pyrie. Lindsay Hansen Park talked about the struggle of making it consumable for non-Mormon audiences. And that's really what it did. Yeah.
You have to admire that.
Yeah.
Especially something that is coming from a Mormon, former Mormon filmmaker, working with an almost completely non-Mormon cast. Like that means that a lot more work devolved on Lance and Troy and Lindsay to do the consulting, and for Lance to implement that consulting in effective ways to make it feel authentic. It just made it obviously a lot harder for him to do, but I feel like he accomplished it. I think it was pretty good. So episode 3, we get to surrender, right? And this is where I feel like we begin to become friends with Detective Taba a lot. And
I loved his character. Holy shit.
Detective Taba is the bomb. Oh, it's so
best.
good.
Yes, very much so. Now, in this, the temple stuff, while the actual things going on there weren't depicted exactly right, like when you're doing initiatories, you were not standing there in a crucified position, but that visual image of somebody standing like that in the position of being crucified was a really good choice for it, because that leaves a massively huge impact. You also don't walk into the endowment session with the robe, sash, apron, and all that shit on. But if you did it the way the ceremonies really are, you would lose your audiences in about 10 minutes, because it takes a fucking hour of the endowment ceremony before you even get to those parts. So, to me, that actually didn't bother me, because when she sat down and they kind of talk about what happened in the initiatories, and she's like, an old lady put oil right next to my private parts. And I was like, there we go. There it is. There it absolutely is. Because so many people in the church, so many Exmos have talked about how that part was such a sexual assault for them, because the worker was touching them further down than they should have, And, there have been many a discussion on Reddit, in ex-Mormon Facebook, all sorts of places where people are like, this was awful. I refuse to ever go back because I was getting fondled by this old man. And I mean, like, the thing he also went through with these at the Veil was the 5 points of fellowship, where you got hands on shoulders. You're still holding together the hands here. And I think it was hip to hip, knee to knee, mouth to ear. And so you're just about pressed up to each other. And how often that I had this old man there pushing his hand right into my breast, and me trying to pull away and him pulling me right back. This is what we went through then. And so I feel like this got shown subtly, but shown really well in that moment there. And that was good. So yeah, the temple stuff, I was really happy with what they presented and everything else. Now, with the cutting the throat thing, that was actually the first sign. It wasn't done. It wasn't the second sign, which was the right-handed cupping. That one was cutting here, a cut that makes no sense whatsoever unless you're in Temple of Doom, because your ribs block everything essential here. You're not going to die from a cut here, but you do die from one here and the disemboweling. Those are the two of the three cuts that you did there that made sense. And so I can see why they changed it to where the cut went this way from the second sign, because it has a more culty aspect to it. That makes sense. But when in the last episode, I'll point it out again, but when Dan looks up at the camera in the casino and just reaches up and does that, that was the actual cut. So Anyway, just ticky details that the changes made absolute perfect sense and they don't bother me.
Right. But this might be a good time to talk about how people are going to use the inaccurately depicted temple scene as as a criticism that, hey, if this is depicted inaccurately, then what else isn't? Therefore, you can't trust any of the show.
Right.
And that is well, I don't know how to overcome that criticism, because it's just tossing out the baby with the bathwater. And it's a shame too, because so much of that scene packed so much into it, because we had the people in the creepy culty outfits in the temple, we had the temple scene, we had all of the Lafferty sisters and Brenda talking, or Lafferty wives and Brenda talking together, and they said that they didn't tell us anything about this. And I think there was a line like, I think they don't tell us so that we won't think about how creepy it is when we're in here. And they're so many cultural cues hit there, and then it shows the fuddy-duddy temple worker getting really mad that they're talking so much, right? So there's so many different things packed into that 1.5 2-minute scene, that if you were to depict them 100% accurately, would take an hour. It would take an entire deep dive of its own. It would take up a full episode of the 7-episode miniseries. And it's clear that they didn't waste any time in the miniseries. So that makes it exceptionally difficult. You have to pack so much into the scene. You have to take some liberties. You have to synthesize things together. But of course, that is going to be a charge that people make and have made and will continue to make, that the whole series is inaccurate because this historical thing, this specific ordinance, is not depicted perfectly, accurately, or whatever the case is. That's troubling to me. And I don't know how to overcome that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what to do about that. It's just one of those very difficult problems. Any thoughts, anybody? Do you know how to overcome that? Hey, when your friends or family say, oh no, it's full of inaccuracies. Oh no, I read a Deseret News article about how the church historian Rick Turley talked about this and this and this and this thing inaccurate, so you can't trust it. What do you say to that? How do you react to that? Even
it's not really what you say to it, but kind of throw your hands up, because if it was depicted accurately, then they'd be pissed at it for that. So there's no winning.
Right.
Mormonism always wins.
Yeah, there's not much you could say that's going to convince them anyway. So
yeah, anything in the temple is kind of off limits, whether you depict it accurately or inaccurately, or I bet if you talked about it even in the show and didn't show it, they'd be just as mad.
Right. Especially because these penalties are where you're promising to let somebody kill you for talking about them. So it's like, okay, yeah.
Right. And the fact that they're still upset when it's been out of there for however many years. I mean, my mother is young enough that she didn't have those penalties in there. So the fact that they're still mad about that, but then aren't still mad about more the Mountain Meadows, kind of shows that it's cherry picking, right?
It's definitely cherry picking. I think Will ask, what was the question? He says, what covenants are associated with the chest being cut? Maybe those are breakable covenants since the punishment won't kill you. And that was the second token of the erotic, which wasn't that the law of chastity?
Perfect. Perfect.
I'm trying to remember because I think it went, what was it? Law of obedience, law of chastity, law of sacrifice, and law of consecration. I think that was the order. Was that the order?
Wow. How fitting.
I'm trying to find, because I once downloaded the full script of the original one that with the penalties that showed the changes, the change in 1990 as well as the more recent change, and I'm just trying to find where it is in my.
You know what? If that is the case, then it shows yet another layer where Lance was able to like weave into the story even more levels of hidden information, right? Because like at the end of it all, they kill Brenda claiming that she is fornicating. And the fornicating that they're talking about is actually, well, they're saying that is disobedience of your husband. They call it fornicating or fornication, right? So if it is indeed chastity that they were assigning the second penalty with the throat slit in the show, is fornication is a violation of that, you get your throat slit, then it's just like he took that artistic liberty and then he interwove it into the story much later on. And I admire that. Like that's pretty impressive if that is indeed intentional and the case.
Right. I found my document. Now I'm scanning through trying to find it because there's a lot of script beforehand. So I'll tell you in just a second.
Excellent.
Can I make a comment, Bryce?
Please.
One of the things, like after the first 2 episodes aired, there was a lot of, talking about the depictions and especially around like, the fact that the girls were wearing pioneer dresses on Pioneer Day, which is like, I assume normal.
Yes.
But like people were like, that's not how Mormons dress, and that's not how Mormons talk, and that's what. And I was like, you guys, this is how you guys look to everybody else. Like, just enjoy the fact that you get to see a version of yourself that seems strange to you, so that you can see how other people see you on a daily basis. When you use your weird words and you talk about word of wisdom and stuff like that, like we Mormons live in this world where we have our own vernacular, our own stuff, and we don't know what we look like to outsiders. But everything that wasn't perfectly portrayed as like Mormon culture in the show was almost like a way to reflect back to Mormons, like, this is what you look like to us. I don't know if the writer thought that when he was writing it, but I feel like people missed an opportunity to be like, oh, that we do look weird.
Yeah.
That's a really good point.
Yes, it is.
I hope that is true. Maybe causes people to come away with that. That's a really, really good point.
Okay, I was wrong, by the way. First token is the law of obedience, which I was right on, but the second one is law of the gospel. Damn.
Bummer.
That's the one with, avoid all like-mindedness, loud laughter, evil speaking of the Lord's anointed, taking of the name of God in vain, every other unholy and impure practice. So that's when you get your chest cut.
Okay.
And you don't die.
No.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, the fornication part was funny for me because he was like, oh, Brenda cheated? And he was like, what? No.
You're the one who said it.
But apparently fornication is not obeying your husband. Like
Okay.
I heard like Lindsay said that was actually
That was really good. I mean, that was later on, but that was actually a really good thing because they're changing the definitions of everything. They're changing what is something worth being killed over so that they can go and satisfy this bloodlust of theirs is basically what it is. And that's what that whole thing showed. Yeah.
And that's very characteristic too. Whatever it is within the culture, they'll happily create a boogeyman out of it. And if that requires co-opting or changing definitions of words or even manufacturing words, then all the more jargon for to enter the Mormon lexicon, right?
To show what a peculiar people the Mormons are. Yeah.
With peculiar language.
The other thing that's really important to bring up about this episode 3, though, is when they go in for the girls' baptism interview. That is highly important because one, when he talks to the bishop afterwards for the girls' baptism interview, that is highly important because one, something is echoing everywhere. Okay, I'm like, wow, I'm listening to myself. Yay. Anyway, all right. So it's really important because for a cop to do that is a violation of his job. He was talking to the bishop about his job, which he should not have done, but also, that should have gotten him fired or kicked off the case right there because the bishop's not involved. But the other thing is, it also shows that Mormon feeling of my bishop is infallible because he's called of God. God wouldn't have put him there if he didn't want him there. So therefore, he's the one I can talk to, I can trust. Doesn't matter that he doesn't have any training in any of this shit. He's still the one I can trust because God put him there. And that's what he was expecting. He was expecting that confessional seal that should have been there, and finding that bishop immediately talked to those above and repercussions started raining down on him from it was fascinating in there because that is exactly on point of what happens.
This bishop's interview I thought was really important because it showed the creepiness of the bishop's interviews, although it depicts Becca and Jeb in the meeting in the bishop's interview with the kid, which happens for baptismal interviews, I think, pretty often, but for all the interviews after, that's pretty damn rare. But it also creates a source of tension between Becca and Jeb. And it creates conflict within their marriage that we then get to see play out through the rest of the series. And that is a bit of an inciting incident that allows us stakes, that allows Pyrie to have personal stakes in this matter, that he sees his own life falling apart because suddenly he's coming into contact with this information that makes him question his religious convictions. Right. And in this, the kids the daughter aces her baptismal interview,
which was a hell of a lot shorter than they actually are. There's like 4 questions that didn't get asked.
They got off so easy. I wish he would have asked about chastity in it, right?
Yeah, because they get asked that in those. I remember that when my daughter was asked that. Yep.
Insane.
Yeah.
But so it creates the personal tension within the Pyrie family, and then it has the implications that what was shared in confidence with the bishop immediately makes its way to the first presidency. And then that also serves to be a moving stakeholder within the storyline as well. This is really when the corporate church gets involved in the story and starts to shove its little fucking nose where it doesn't belong.
Yeah.
And that becomes a major source of tension by the end of the series, of course. But we get at later on in this episode too, that Pyrie pulls the priesthood card and says that he doesn't want his daughter getting baptized. He wants to postpone it until the case is over. Right. And it's not necessarily, depicted in the show that it is that, one of the reasons he asks for it to be postponed is because he's going through the beginning events of a faith crisis, right? But he just says that he just wants the case. He wants to finish the case. He wants to get it wrapped up. He wants it off his mind so that he can focus on baptizing his daughter.
Right.
But once again, it's becomes a source of tension, and I think it's really, really important too.
Yeah. Especially everything that she said about it when she's like, no, the ward will look at us as if our daughters failed. And I have been working for this my entire life, which I was like, well, shit, lady, that level should be for your daughter going to the temple and getting married. But okay, all right. So yeah, that one I was like, okay, but on the other hand, she did make it about her. Instead of seeing it from his viewpoint, she's like, no, this, you are not doing this to me, right?
Well, that's a rite of passage when you're raising kids in the church, right? Your kid choosing to be baptized. There's a certain social status that is associated with your kids getting baptized, getting their scouts or their young women's medallion, going on a mission, going to BYU, getting married. The parents reap that social status for the kids' accomplishments that are, venerated within the church. And her saying that, internalizing it and making it about her, reveals the source of those feelings. And I thought it was done very, very impactfully in the dialogue that Becca and Jeb had. And it continues to fester. That continues to be the problem moving forward, what that drives Jeb and Becca apart.
Right. And he also, which is very typical, is he doesn't see he's doing the same thing to his wife that the Laffertys did to theirs. He doesn't see that. There's that cognitive dissonance there. Yeah. Oh God. Okay. And I was remembering with Maya's baptism, because the baptism was scheduled for a weekend that Alex had National Guard. It was a National Guard weekend before they were going out on deployment, and just a couple months before, and they were required to be there. They couldn't leave. They were there from Saturday morning. They didn't come home until Sunday night. And I was like, he can't get out at the time we're scheduled, which was 11 o'clock in the morning. I was like, can we arrange it for later? He said he can get a couple hours off in the evening to come. And the bishop and the stake president both were like, well, no, you could have her grandpa do it. And I was like, no, we'll put it off to next month if you can't do that for this, And so they ended up making it so that she could have her own that evening so that Alex could be there. But I was like, if you're trying to tell me to do it when her dad can't be there, then never mind, but it just reminded me of that moment, because I was like, no, arguing with the stake president and the bishop about it. They weren't very happy with me. There was like 7 or 8 phone calls back from them and trying to convince me and all this shit. And I was like, well, we could put off till next month then. And, it was funny. Anyway. Episode 4, Church and State.
Hold up. There was one more thing that I wanted to talk about during that bishop's interview as well. And sorry, there was a hiccup in the stream. I hope that wasn't just my computer. I'm pretty sure the whole stream went down for just a second. It seems to be back now. I hope.
Back?
One more thing in that interview that was really important was Jeb says that there are some personal things he wants to talk to the bishop about, and immediately the bishop starts projecting what he perceives as the problems in Pyre's life on him, and talks about how your struggle must be so hard with your mother with dementia, and God gave us the pharmacology I can't remember exactly what he said to help us, right? And then like these are things that Jeb he was not prepared to hear, or was not prepared to have a conversation about, but the bishop is pushing what he thinks the questions are, or the struggles in Pyre's life, onto him without actually ever hearing what Jeb is saying. But then Jeb asks him about blood atonement. He asks him about some of these things in the church history. And then the bishop says the most Mormon thing ever: I'm not an academic or a historian. And then he says, I don't go digging in the past. And then he says, leave things that you don't understand on a shelf. And I thought that was so very well depicted in that scene, because that's an interaction that I know so many of us have had with our church leaders or with family members or whatever. Immediately, I don't know, you can't know either. this is not something that we have answers to. You have to wait until you die to get, answers to these questions. And that was like, also, he says something that I thought was very important. He says it's a well-known fact that women struggle with feelings more than men do.
Yeah.
And that perfectly captures the mentality and the problem, and the way that the corporate church culture embraces blaming women the same way that the Laffertys do, only in a much more direct way.
Yes.
So those are a couple important points, details that I felt were really notable there. So yeah, episode 4.
They were good.
Episode 4, Church and State, it is titled. Very appropriately.
Yes. Because he finds out that Diana wrote a letter to the prophet. And now, one of the things is, most people now know this, but I don't know how many knew this then. No letters to the prophet actually get dealt with by the prophet. He sends them right back down to the stake president and the bishop, and they would never be kept private. And so that one, I was like, yeah, the Laffertys for sure would find out. And that is exactly what happened in there. But I was like, ERA types? Did he really say that? When he was talking to Ron about this letter? Oh, those ERA types, they're always, I was like, oh, fuck you. God. Oh my God.
There were quite a few interesting things that happened in that beginning. And one of them was interesting, that Jeb actually called the church office building asking for some information on the bishop, right? And this is the Bishop Lowe, I guess, that the Laffertys went looking for. He was first on the list. They were going to kill him. And then they ended up, falling back to Brenda and Erica. But they ransacked his house, and then he calls the church office building, and the person on the phone specifically says, the prophet is praying for your investigation. And
Jeb gets this just beatific look on his face, like, oh, okay, we'll be able to solve it now because the prophet's praying for us.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that was the knife, right? That was the knife on the table in Act 1, because we very clearly see that from from that point, like that's the opening scene in this episode. And then we see Ron Lafferty going and trying to get a business loan from the banker Bascom, who was in the bishopric of the ward, the Lafferty's ward. Yep. And Bascom stonewalls him and says that the church has asked me to intervene in your brother's anti-government schemes. And this, we learned later, is because Ron's wife, Diana, had sent a letter to the first presidency asking for help, wanting to know what she can do, because her husband, who has multiple times beat her at this point, and the church has not done anything to hold him responsible. She has been repeatedly told by the Relief Society president to go back to your husband and to submit and obey. And she doesn't have any answers. So she wrote to the first presidency for help. And they instead go attack his business. And then Ron seems to take it personal, that this is now, oh, the church is attacking me personally. And that I feels like is really the full break of Ron away from the corporate church.
Yeah. And like what Will says too in the comment section, ERA types, I've heard that phrase, she's the type of woman to wear the pants in the family. Yeah, the same thing, which we saw Brenda wearing pants a lot in this. Subtle messages, visual ones everywhere. So packed with them all through this. So in this too, because at this point they've got Robin, Alan, and who's the other one? Sam or is it just Robin and Alan at the, nope, Sam's there too at the police station being questioned, right?
I think so, yeah.
And Robin, when they start asking him a question, he doesn't want to answer. He says he wants his phone call. The person he calls is the stake president. Because he's like, well, the church authorities over the government. He doesn't call a lawyer, he calls stake president, which, God, we talk about the church being like the mafia, and this really showed it. absolutely hands down showed it, because that whole meeting with him starts with him smiling and everything and all this other stuff. But once Pyrie is not backing down on stuff, he very clearly says to him, using coded phrases that go back to the stuff that's in the temple, is you got to protect the church. You have made covenants. You know what the punishment is for breaking your covenants. He right there threatens him with a Danite coming to his door, ready to slit his throat for breaking his covenants. One of which is, you're not going to speak out against the leadership of the church. And that right there, I love it, that how he reacted to it, that he's in his office almost throwing up in the garbage can, because he's realizing the stake president just threatened his life if he doesn't make the church look good. That's shitty. And so he knows right there the church is not in line with him doing his actual job.
Right. And this is the first real signal that we get that the church is taking an active role in stonewalling this investigation, or in trying to that's maybe not the right characterization, but is trying to do their best to influence it in such a way that the church is portrayed in the best possible light. And it goes even more to the central thesis of the show, that Mormonism breeds dangerous men, because here we have a, suited up stake president who walks into a police station and shakes hands with all the cops who are all in his stake, probably, right?
Right.
And then he makes this very thinly veiled temple blood atonement death cult oath, illusion, death threat, fucking crazy. And then by the end of the series, we have Dan looking up into the camera in the casino and doing it, making the motion deliberately, right? It's just different iterations of the same invocation. And that is I feel like the point in the story where Pyrie realizes that this is actually a life and death investigation. This is not your run-of-the-mill murder scheme, but that the players and the actors are far more powerful than he understands. That seemed like it was the moment where his own personal scope of the problem expanded to actually include the church.
Right. And it's kind of cute too. Detective Taba sees him walk in. He says, "Oh, Robert Wagner showed up," which those who were alive then know what he's referencing, because that was an actor who had, I think it was the most popular TV show on at the time, which was called Heart to Heart. And it went from 1979 to 1984. But that was a nice little reference for anybody who was alive then, knows what he was talking about. Yes, he was Natalie Wood's husband as well. So yeah, very good looking man at the time. Yeah. So that was a fun little dig, which, by the way, other people have fussed saying about people calling Detective Taba Lamanite. We did that all the time then. Everybody did it then. We all did it. Like, God. So anyway,
it wasn't controversial. It was doctrine.
Yes. God. But the other thing is, and this made me so angry, we had to take like a 15-20 minute break, and because I wanted to put my fist through the computer, when the Relief Society president threatened Becca with not seeing their 3 dead children in the next life if things kept going on the way they were. Get your daughters baptized or you will never see them, is basically what she was saying. Not talking to Jeb at all, who was standing right there, but letting him know everybody's circling the wagons, trying to stop him from doing his job, and that his wife is being included. And I was so fucking angry about that, because I know exactly what she was feeling there. Yeah. All because he's doing his fucking job. Yeah.
Yeah, that showed multiple directions of religious coercion, right? It was from the Relief Society president, pressuring Becca to pressure her husband to allow their daughters to get married, right? Or to
get
not
baptized.
married, to get baptized, right? It's all the same shit, right? But at the end of the day, it reveals multiple layers of religious coercion. And we get another scene with this Relief Society president and bishop later on that shows how dangerous she is, because she was one of the people responsible for sending a Lafferty wife, Diana, back to Ron after they had evidence that he had beat her. And then he continued to beat her. Yeah. Right. Like, and that is something that I know has happened a ton in the church and happens to this day in the church.
Right.
And at all times, somebody like a Relief Society president or just some, a fellow person in the Relief Society has that eternal family threat. Because at the end of the day, that's what it is. The threat of an eternal family and losing that as a bludgeon to get people to do what you want. And
that the Lord requires you to endure trials. Maybe this is just your trial that you're required to endure. Yeah. Like what Will said in the comments, the only thing more sacred than the temple is the church's PR.
Bingo.
There
That's
it is.
Exactly it. Yep. Also in this episode, this is when the police chief returns from his vacation and learns all about the case. And he says gives some words of caution to Jeb, and he says, you know as well as I do that outsiders have a hard time distinguishing our church from the fundamentalists.
Right.
And that really, I put in my notes, that's kind of the crux of why the church was hamstringing the investigation to begin with and everything. And the chief wants to shut down questions that they have later at a press conference about the FLDS influence on all of this. But it's also really important, right? And Jeb actually stands up to the chief and vocalizes his thoughts that there may be some fundamentalist Mormon influences on this. And that happens later. But that is a break away from his superior officer.
Right.
However,
that's what caused, because of the Relief Society says the stuff to Becca after that press conference. And that's when everybody's like, oh, you're a pariah now because you don't believe in the church. Yeah.
But also important in this episode is when they show Dan going around to different fundamentalist groups to learn about the history of the church. Mm-hmm. Because, I mean, he even says it that I think Alan says this, but like libraries in Utah and even BYU don't have this history, so I had to look elsewhere. And this is where Dan is going around. He goes to Short Creek and immediately he's bombarding these fundamentalists with questions about the government, questions about DNC 132, questions about these and this and that and this and that. And it shows that like the result of the church suppressing these groups, suppressing this information, result in people having to seek the information from outside sources that the church cannot control. And what that eventually can lead to is somebody like Dan Lafferty going and experimenting with these groups and coming to away from that journey, thinking that he hears the voice of God for himself and that he is the one mighty and strong and that God is telling him to kill people. Really important stuff. It also has depicted when Emma was given DNC 132 by Hiram Smith.
Yeah. Oh God.
Yeah. Thoughts? Anybody?
that just. Oh yeah. Go ahead.
I love that. That was like so powerful. Tyner's expressions and her body language just was like said it all.
The absolute disgust on her face was the best. Oh my God. How accurate was it?
Pretty accurate. They made some choices in the acting that I thought were really interesting. And I believe this was during the Q&A after the premiere that Tyner talked about filming that scene. She said that was the first scene that she filmed as Emma. Oh. And she said it was like it's the hardest thing she's done in her career because it was like a cold start. She had done all of this research and all of this character development and had practiced the Emma character so much, and then this was like her first scene with it, and she's like, I was just in tears by the end of the day. It was a very hard day on set, and it's clear like they did a good job with the scene. Now, I have my opinions about Emma's perspective on DNC 132 and the events that led up to it. But there's a whole lot of ambiguity in the record here. So I think the choice that Lance made to portray it the way he did is consistent enough with what most people understand the story, the way that it went. And I do appreciate that he depicted Joseph Smith receiving the appendix to the revelation, because if you read DNC 132, it's clearly written in 2 sittings. There's the bulk of the content, which talks about the everlasting covenant, the new and everlasting covenant, describes the provenance of the practice of plural marriage, the requirements to get into the celestial kingdom. And then when we hit like verse 59 or whatever, that's when it switches over to says, I now have words for my handmaid Emma. And that's like, clearly we see the difference in the style and the difference of the tone of the revelation in the text itself. And how that's portrayed in the show is she's confronting Joseph with this. And she says, well, maybe I'll just take multiple husbands. And then Joseph's eyes roll into the back of his head. And then he says, I command my handmaid Emma to cleave unto none but her husband. Yeah. And it's I think an artistic rendition of very close to the actual events as best as we can tell. And I reveled in it. I loved that scene. It was so good. And then it ends with her tossing the revelation in the fire. Yeah. Beautiful scene. I'm so glad it was done. I'm so glad that they portrayed it. And they portrayed it in the context of Dan going around to all these different fundamentalist groups and learning about the peacemakers and learning about the polygamy revelations and learning about Emma and Emma opposing polygamy and Emma becoming the boogeyman who loathed polygamy and caused, her to lead her son to, be the prophet of the apostate church of, RLDS. It's a whole fascinating scene, and I thought it was really well done and impactful and important for the overall show as well.
Mm-hmm. If I may add, I also thought just the fact that they showed him like having a revelation real time, I've never seen it depicted like that, and I never necessarily thought about it as a Mormon, like what time this came up. You kind of read the little heading in the book, but it's all kind of like Moses got it the same way that Joseph Smith did. It's kind of up in the air. And then they show how Ron and Dan also have the same sort of experience, and they just kind of like sit there and say words that are clearly out of their own brain or influenced by them. Mm-hmm. But as a Mormon, you don't pick that up. So I think that was like something I was really happy that they showed, because I've never seen that shown in any show or movie before.
Right. There was a movie we had back when I was on my mission. I just don't know when it went out. I went on my mission in 1988, but it was called, I think it was Restoration of the Church. And we would show it in conjunction with the First Vision movie. And, it's used as a missionary tool, but because, you do the First Vision, the one with Stuart Peterson, and him getting all that. And then the next one came where it showed them getting the priesthood and starting the church. And in it, okay, I'm looking it up while I'm talking to you. It would no, that's not the one. But they're there setting up the church in that little cabin, and he's standing there, and all of a sudden he stops. And then he walks over and he puts his hand on, who was it? Sidney Rigdon, or Oliver Cowder, who was a scribe all the time. And he starts giving another revelation. It was the same kind of theme as what they showed in this. Just same kind of thing, but he just stands there and he's like, oh, and then of course he pulls out his pen and starts scribing everything. But yeah. God, now I'm trying to remember.
I heard one LDS. I watched a video that was basically some LDS people criticizing the show, and one thing they noted was like, I think it was in that scene they noted they put creepy music over it, and they were like, they were so creepy, and I was like, dude, It's the
It
same thing
is.
that you show in your things. You just put the holy music over it. It's like the same words, the same context most of the time, which I thought was crazy. That I was like, you're the one who believes this actually happened, right? That he's actually getting revelation from God. Why does it matter the music? You know?
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
I think it is also they show different versions of getting that revelation. With Joseph Smith, he rolls his eyes back in his head. With
Yeah.
Ron, it's when he's like typing one letter at a time on the keyboard.
Yeah.
And it's very clear that he has in his mind what he wants to say, but he's like almost doing the like a self-serving theatrics to make it feel more holy, that he's like individually typing out and thinking and processing each letter. But then we have Dan, who like gathers his family together and is like, you know, like amping up the I will go anywhere, I will do anything, I will go anywhere, I will do anything. And they're yelling it and yelling it and yelling it. And the family is like, what the fuck is going on? And then he jumps up and says, yes, Lord, I feel the calling. Right? Like there are these different men receiving different versions of what they consider their inspiration, and then it's all the same thing. It's all the same thing. And like I thought it was really impactful with the Emma scene. She says, we made a vow. What does she say? And I will not stand by and watch you take more wives because you've grown bored of me. And
Right.
then he says, are you accusing me of falsifying revelation? And that's like a charge against him. That's like harming his ego, right? And
Right.
the same thing, like with it, it just contributes more to the overall thesis that these megalomaniacal men want to blame women for everything wrong in their life, and when they are held accountable for the bullshit they're doing, they're mad that it is their wife saying, hey, I think you're full of shit. And in the case with like Brenda, she stands up. She sees that there's a problem and she tries to deal with it in every possible way that she can. With Diana, she vacillates between trying to submit more and then realizing that that's only going to result in more abuse. And then she takes the kids and runs away. With Matilda, she just submits, totally and completely submits to Dan. And at the end, she has to be physically rescued by Diana to get her out of her dire situation.
Except when Dan says his next wife is to be her daughter's.
Yes.
That's the only time she really does it. And because my understanding is he actually did do that, say that her 14-year-old daughter was supposed to be his second wife. And she's like, no. And he ended up taking somebody else, because I think, isn't he the only one that actually took more than one wife? I'm trying to remember.
I think Ron had some philandering about, but I think Dan was the only one who like solemnized.
Yeah. And that's what I mean. Because I mean, yeah, there were, philandering, but yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that was also
yes, Joseph was wearing a sword in that scene. He comes in uniform with the sword, like, I am the boss and I will destroy you if you don't do this.
Out to my wife. I was like, hey, he was like, I started flipping out about that and almost the whole scene too.
I was like, that was such a threatening moment because he had that. And when he says, you will be destroyed. And she's like, she was one tough lady.
Yeah, that was an awesome scene. And he had to be in his general uniform. He had to be. And Melissa said in the comments she loved that he was in the comment, or in the Nauvoo Legion uniform. He had to be, right? Like that was the perfect thing. He had grown so powerful. He had his own army, he had his own fiefdom, he had the will of the people, and he had committed so many crimes. Oh, and also depicting Lilburn Boggs and that assassination too. Like that is interwoven a couple of times within the story as well, that, hey, these things can be incredibly dangerous, that it's not just people who they see as like insiders who are non-believers or fornicators or people deserving of punishment, but it can very much be Gentiles, outsiders who are persecuting us, who can feel the wrath of God as well.
Yeah.
That was a fascinating detail. Episode 5, One Mighty and Strong.
That's when they get into the private group scripture study. And
School of the Prophets.
that was a huge deal then they spoke out against, because people would get together, private scripture study into the deep doctrines. And I remember being told in church, these letters sent around by the stake or whatever, but saying not to do those. The church does not condone those meetings. And their thing was people get so lost in the deeps, they lose their testimony and stuff. But it's like, well, it's more like they get so lost in the deeps, they start seeing what's the church is covering up. But yeah, so that was actually kind of funny to me, because that is a huge deal with them is they get caught into that scripture study of the School of the Prophets to find references that help them with the narrative they're trying to create.
Right. This is when we get a new character in the story, Brady. Mr. Brady, he calls him the Brady, what do you say? The Brady something, the Brady family, when detectives,
like the Brady Bunch, you mean?
Yeah. I think he said Brady Clan or something like that. It's like, just say Brady Bunch. Come on, man. We're all
you can say it.
And when he walked in the house, the stairway looked exactly like the stairwell in the Brady Bunch house. Like, come on, just say it, all right?
They were such a typical Mormon couple, everything was.
Yeah.
Oh,
but
God.
this is pretty important, right? So we get this new Brady character who is a member of the School of the Prophets and introduces the detectives to the prophet Onias and to this private scripture study group. And the School of the Prophets, this harkens back to Curlin history, right? This is when the dudes all sat around in the upper floor above the Whitney store or in the Johnson home or wherever, and they drank a whole lot of sacrament and got revelations. But that's apparently what these guys were doing too, just studying their scriptures and getting revelations and talking about polygamy every so often. But this is when we also learn about the dream mine and just how deep the fundamentalist Mormon lore really goes here with this dream mine project that the church tacitly approved of, but then now has become so entrenched in fundamentalism, and I think currently owned by a certain faction of fundamentalists, and it becomes a central place where a lot of the story, a setting that where a lot of the story continues from that time forward. Prophet Onias. Thoughts on him, Shannon, and everybody else?
He was interesting. Because he's like, I'm searching for the one mighty and strong, but when he thinks he's found him later on, he's like, well, actually, you're not really him. Never mind, because I don't like what you're saying. But he was just an interesting one. I don't know.
I loved the character of Onias, and he's already he was a really eccentric, crazy fundamentalist bastard, right? But I loved the character because he's so clearly a con man, and he so clearly sees himself as a con man, but he's been doing it his whole life that he's just phoning in the cons at this point. He's just bored with his own craft, and I loved it. And we get to see Onias infiltrating this group, becoming a member of this group, and connecting the Laffertys with or Brady or with the School of the Prophets scripture study group where they met Onias, and we get to see how incestuous the information is in these little tiny fundamentalist prophet communities. And very quickly Onias sees how manipulatable these guys are, especially Ron and Dan, especially.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's fascinating. Ron goes out and goes to this polyg commune in Oregon, and he has some experiences, and we can talk about those too. But he comes back, and I think that's this episode. He comes back and he finally meets Onias for the first time, and here he sees that Onias has all of his brothers putting together flyers and mailers to general authorities or to people who are on their mailing lists or whatever. And he's like blown away, this guy Onias, and immediately Ron becomes a threat to the prophet Onias.
Yeah.
So Onias sees Ron as the greatest potential alpha that he has to get under his spell. He has to control one way or another. And he does so expertly. It is so perfect how Onias gets Ron under his spell, because he immediately taps into Ron's ego and seamlessly interweaves scripture into every sentence he says, and talks about the one mighty and strong, and asks Ron, do you think that I've met the one mighty and strong? Builds him up. And finally Ron says, I think I am the one mighty and strong. Yeah. It's just so perfect, so con man, so by the books, very well depicted.
Yeah.
This also has Ron, because Ron goes back home after Diana kicked him out for hitting her. It shows Ron coming back to the house, and Ron's daughter is cutting the markings out of his garments.
His older daughter. Yeah. That was the first time you see the markings on the garments. I mean, you see like Becca take hers off in the beginning, which all of them, I'm like, those are hell of a lot looser than most people ever wore them. They had them really close to the skin, because otherwise they get bunched up under your other clothes. But yeah, that was, but also was showing the full piece garments, which that was about around the time period when they brought in the 2-piece ones. Mm-hmm. But at that point, you know, most of these were full piece, all one piece. They were, yeah, that was something I was really happy not to have to wear.
Yeah,
yeah, for sure. That was interesting though, because it, to every Mormon watching that who's been through the temple, that is a very clear statement of the daughter understanding he doesn't belong in the temple. His temple garments have been defiled and he doesn't belong there.
Yeah.
And so, because I mean, when you have to throw away your garments because they're worn out or whatever, you know, you're not supposed to alter them at all. You're just supposed to get a new set. You are first supposed to remove the marks that make them so they're no longer sacred. And it's very specifically told, at least back when we were going through, is that when you take the marks out, first you take them out and then you cut them up so that the marks can't be put together or seen, you know, and some people are told to burn them and all that, you know, but the more polyester in it, they're melt instead of burn. But at any rate, by this, she's saying the garment isn't sacred anymore. You should not be wearing the garment. The fact that he put them on with the holes, I found that weird. I wasn't sure why he did that. Yeah.
I think that was done artistically to show that he no longer cares. He no longer cares what the corporate church says about him. He is now walking his own path.
Had he been excommunicated by this point in time?
I believe that this scene is after his excommunication. Yeah.
Because if it's after his excommunication, it makes perfect sense, because he's not allowed to wear the garment anymore if he's been excommunicated.
I'm trying to think of the sequence of events here. And this gets a little bit muddled because the show itself flash cuts a couple of scenes, and I'm trying to place this because remember the meeting with Ron and his brothers where they have him in the intervention chair, and Dan just breaks Ron down after just assaulting him with scriptures, and then all of the brothers gather around and they pray with him, and Dan clutches Ron's hands together like this. And then that's the point, you know, that is like flash cut when they're in the prison talking to Dan after he got arrested for not pulling over, that Ron is like squeezing Dan's hands together, causing him physical pain. That actually transpired after, but we saw it before. So I'm trying to piece together the timeline. I'm not sure if that was before or after he was excommunicated.
Josh says it's right after. It's when he came home from the excommunication. So it would make sense. His daughter would be cutting those out then. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, okay. So that would make more sense too.
And that's when he gave his son the watch that he broke first, and then gave it to him. Yeah. Which at that time I was like, I have no fucking idea what the significance of that is.
Interesting.
Yeah. Because I was like, why did he break the clock face? Yeah.
Right. And I think there was some like there's a little bit of artistry in that as well. Like the time that he has been living on up to this point is no longer relevant to him. He is breaking the time that has been applied to him or ascribed to him, because he said it was like his grandfather's watch or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So like, this is what my grandfather gave to me as a good righteous son. I am breaking this because it is no longer relevant to me. And he did that with the holes cut out of his garments. And of course, that's a flash forward to John Taylor's watch being broken in Carthage.
Okay, I was just going to say, which one was it in Carthage whose watch stopped the bullet yank? But yeah, I like that there's that quote that you put in. Sometimes when we're closer to God, that's when we're the most persecuted.
Yeah. So, programming his son with this dangerous persecution shit.
Which is easy to do since Mormons do that. That's all of Mormonism.
That's kind of how it functions. It has to. It has to have that, right?
There's also where he's where Pyrie finds out what the real discussion with Ron was about, and that what's his name, Bascom, saw some of the abuse happening and did nothing. You know, he saw him punch his wife inside of the car, knew that it was going to get worse, knew he was angry at his wife, but didn't want to pass that on.
Right.
And he's condoning violence. All of them were condoning violence to women, domestic violence. You know, he's like, I thought it was just a domestic, as if that doesn't matter. And I wanted to punch my screen again, which is rather violent in and of itself. Wait.
Weird. Violence begets violence.
Okay. Yeah. But also the point is made, and I think it's Alan who said this, is that the church feels more comfortable when they are writing the story. And that is always how the church is. That's a very important point to be made here. But also I kind of call this episode the Highlander one, because it starts in on that. There can be only one. I was like, Bryce, we need to watch the Highlander this week. God.
This was interesting too, because the bishop in this scene did what he said that he did, what the church has instructed. And that was really, really interesting, because it shows how much there's the top-down hierarchical structure. The bishop was just complying with what the leadership told him to do, because obviously corporate LDS knew everything that was going on along the way, and they were trying to subtly influence. They were trying to write the story any way that they could, which is why they didn't want the press conference to talk about religious influences on the murders to begin with. And like that, we see the very direct result of physical harm befalling a family because the bishop intervened on behalf of the church instead of on behalf of the wife and kids.
Yeah. And there's also the point of, hang on, I thought of this as you were talking. Oh, fuck it. Of course, it went right out of my head. Never mind. I'll think of it in a minute when you're talking about something else. Then I'll be like, I'm just going to interrupt. Okay.
All right. In this, we also get the Nauvoo expositor depicted, as well as this is important, and I attribute a lot of this to Lindsay's being a consultant on this. But she tapped into, or well, the film creator tapped into lore that is specific to the fundamentalists and to, well, yeah, just to the fundamentalists descended from the Brighamite Church. And one of which is that I can't remember. I think it was Alan telling Jeb this, that he said Emma publicly aligned herself with the dissenters, and that's when it launches into the scene of the Nauvoo expositor, being, taken out in the streets and burned out and everything. And it depicts the surrender of that. And I'm like, so Emma publicly aligned herself with the dissenters. What in the hell? I don't know of any document where she publicly said that the church should not practice polygamy beyond things that were like published in the Times and Seasons to go out to the public. But those were things that William Phelps drafted and that Joseph told Emma to have all of the Relief Society sign. That wasn't Emma herself aligning herself with the dissenters. But then the detail is given in, I think, the next episode, that when she sent the letter to Joseph Smith telling him to surrender, that was her publicly aligning herself with the dissenters. And that's very much within the polygamous lore, that Emma was the true cause of the death of Joseph Smith. And it's one of those subtle details. Most people watching it will never know that. And there are a couple of other like fundamentalist things that are peppered in throughout here, fundamentalist lore specifically. Most people watching will never know that those things are not corporate LDS culture, but fundamentalist culture. But the fact that those details exist prove that this is a project that is like that a lot of thought and deliberate effort went into having those small details. And I admire that. I appreciate that. And there's a lot of them throughout the entire series. It's good stuff.
Yes.
So episode 6, Revelation. Oh, yes. All right. This is the one where Jeb and Bill Taba confront the matriarch Lafferty. And she's an asshole. Right, like she is just a fucking monster. Immediately, like, how dare you let this Lamanite into my house? Telling Jeb to tell the Lamanite to not talk in her house, and like, fuck, whoa, we got a lot of character development out of her this time around.
We did, and we already know that she's on Ron's side for everything. She's been raising him to think he's the best one out of the family and all that shit. And so, even still watching her husband put Dan in charge, she's like, no, you're still the strong one. You're the one mighty and strong. Yeah, like Julie just said, she groomed him for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought it was so revealing because this is very like mafia wife-esque, right? The enabler mafia wife, right. Where she, and very Mormon as well, she says to Jeb, if only my boys were here, you would see the innocence in them. A Heavenly Father resides in each and every one of them.
It's not necessarily a Mormon thing.
Well, but still, like I know, just the best boys. I have the nicest boys, right?
All you have to do is see them in their countenance. Yeah. Yes. Nobody could be that kind and gentle and be that bad.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Only the grumpy ones are bad.
And at this
even
point,
Jane Austen will tell you that. Oh. I'm sorry, I had to do it. I absolutely had to do it.
I don't know what's happening right now. I don't know.
We believe Wickham. Nobody could be that kind and nice and sweet to everybody and be bad. All right. Anyway, go ahead.
Julie got it.
Of course she did. I think she's the only one of our listeners who's like, I know what Shannon's talking about. Everybody else is like, Shannon, shut the fuck up. We don't give a shit.
No, never. Yeah. If that were the case, nobody would listen because they say that about me. Maybe if they're saying that about you and saying that about me at alternating times.
Only me when I'm talking about Jane Austen.
And me when I'm talking about anything. So here in this scene as well, we get Jeb takes Brady because they brought Brady and Alan along with them to find the farm, the Lafferty farm, to try and find where Ron and Dan are hiding out to get them arrested. So Jeb takes Brady downstairs with him and confronts Brady and says, like, come clean, tell me everything. And Brady is just like, once again, just like Onias, stringing together scripture reference after scripture reference in response to everything that Jeb is asking. And Jeb says, you're just using scripture moment to moment to save your own skin.
Yeah.
And like, how fucking perfect is that? How useful is scripture to us when we find ourselves in a bind?
Yeah.
There's so much of it, and we can read it however we want to excuse or permit any sort of conduct we possibly want.
Plus, it's such a Mormon thing because he already knows that Pyra's Mormon, and he's trying to get that connection so that Pyra will go easier on him. And yeah, it's just, yeah. Yes, you do, Will. Sorry.
Yeah. Joseph Smith in a nutshell, the so-called church in a nutshell. Yes, exactly. Yeah, or read some, I should read some Jane Austen too. Yeah. All right. This is interesting and something I wanted to discuss here because Ron goes to this free love commune in Oregon and he has experiences. He has carnal experiences. He drinks wine. He is flanked on either side in a hot tub by two free love, hippie hotties or whatever. And then he gets
everybody's naked.
And everybody's naked. And then he gets baptized.
Yeah.
And then this so-called free love prophet kisses Ron on the mouth. And I want to say, like, we paused it before the kiss, but like as Ron was getting baptized, we paused it and we had to discuss this for a second, Shannon and I. And I was like, final note, this is super homoerotic. I'm super into it. And we both kind of chuckled. And then when we started playing it and then they kissed, we're like, oh, wow, holy shit.
Okay. And this wasn't a kiss smack like this. This was kiss.
Yeah.
Twice.
And Ron was like getting into it as well, too, right?
Yeah, that was fun. Yeah. But go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, you finish what you're saying. I'm interrupting you.
Okay. Well, the point that I wanted to make about this was the depiction of Mormon ordinances by apostate Mormons, right? Because almost everything that we've seen in the show up to this point, whether it's the temple ordinances, whether it's the garments, whether it's the priesthood blessings that are given to like Brenda or whatever, any of these things we see depicted that Mormons are doing that are Mormon ordinances is corporate LDS Mormons, Salt Lake City Mormons doing these things. And it's telling them in a way that is, friendly to the overall narrative. I think this is the first time that we see a Mormon ordinance using almost all exclusively Mormon ordinance words that every Mormon knows, but done by a polygamist conducting that ordinance. This
in
is
a hot tub naked. Yeah. All
naked
of that.
in a hot tub before kissing the man that he's baptizing.
Yeah.
I wonder how that's going to hit for people.
Yeah.
And the only change in the language that he used in the baptism was by the calling of the true Melchizedek priesthood instead of just the Melchizedek priesthood.
Yeah.
So I wonder how people are going to react to that.
Right.
Because those are evil Mormons. This is a carnal Mormon. This is an apostate.
They just had alcohol and taught Ron how to smash garlic with his hand. That wasn't
That's a euphemism.
Like, what in the fuck was that about? It's like the side of a knife is easier.
Yeah,
you actually crush the garlic that way. Okay.
Yeah, crush it, peel it. It's easier.
Whatever. Okay. I couldn't understand the significance of that. That made no sense. Yeah.
That's another fundamentalist thing. Specifically this is where I experienced it in the Kingston group. They have a green drink that is essentially just garlic and barley that they blend up and they drink every day. And that's their, like, they have to do it by commandment. They have to drink this every single day. And keeps
the vampires away. Yeah.
Oh my God. It was so awful.
It was so nasty. Bryce actually chugged the whole thing. I only took a sip.
Did you throw up afterwards?
I should have. Get it out of my system and purge it.
I love garlic, but not straight.
No, it was just straight blended up with barley.
Oh,
it
gross.
Was awful. My God. Yeah. Well, and we had, you know, a former Kingston group person there who made the drink with us. And like just the scent of it alone was so much for him, like so triggering for him that he had to step outside for a few minutes while the smell cleared. Right. Like, yeah. So that, I think that was another nod to the fundamentalist culture there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here we also get another scene where Alan and Brenda get in a fight and he hits Brenda. And now we have, I think, all of the Lafferty men abusing their wives.
Yeah.
I think that was the final one that we needed to get that actually to check that box. But Brenda's father comes and babysits Alan while Brenda takes the baby to the doctor. And we see a very interesting parallel where Ron was at this polygamous commune and is tempted with wine and partakes. And Brenda's father does the same thing with Alan with chocolate.
And it gives him the cordial one.
Cordial. I missed that detail.
I did not, because I'm like, because I knew a family in my ward growing up where they wouldn't allow the cherry cordial ones around chocolates because of the possibility it might actually have alcohol in it, or even just the implication because it's cordial, which is a type of wine, I think, or something. So yeah, that I was like, oh, I wonder. Okay.
Yeah. Well, it just shows these degrees of sin. It's people doing the same thing and like just reasoning with a believer, like, hey, how hard do you really believe in that?
Right.
And convincing them to change.
Right. And there's the whole caffeine issue was kind of a deal then. It was in, I think it was 1985 or 86 in an enzyme. They said it's not about the caffeine. The coffee and tea thing is not about the caffeine. It's about other stuff. And it makes no sense. But, you know, people were starting to push this thing of it. And there were some people, really more extremist ones, who would also not eat chocolate because it probably had caffeine in it. But it's like caffeine is in so many things about the same level as chocolate. It's not a big deal. But like this, like her father points out, and it's not enough to matter. But here he is as a bishop going, chocolate's okay. And that scene, I mean, I like that it's juxtaposed against the wine scene with Ron, but also I like that he's showing something that's really stupid in the fundamentalism attitude here of, oh no, chocolate's against the word of wisdom because it's got caffeine in it, and caffeine's against the word of wisdom, you know. And this is something you've also had these little sly references to from Jeb going on, because Talbot drinks Diet Coke that has caffeine in it and he won't. And so, you know, there's all of that going on, that extremist level on the word of wisdom. And so that is one of the things that her father is addressing with Alan at that point, is stop being such a fucking extremist here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And helps to break him down a little bit too, right? Because from that point forward, Alan has a very different perspective of what's going on, and then pulls himself back. Lafferty's definitely did smoke a lot of weed. Yeah.
Yeah. But then again, it's an herb.
It's an herb.
There.
It's a wholesome herb.
It's not actually spoken against quite the same way in the word of wisdom. You know, it's just harmful drugs is what the prophets say. But on a direct reading of the word of wisdom, you know, herbs are set there for the good of the body. Therefore, yeah.
So partake liberally.
Yes,
in the
Heavenly
Season
Mother
thereof,
gave
though.
us weed. You
In
got
the
that
Season
right,
Will. This was interesting too, because we have the Pyre's mom. I can't remember her name. I think it starts with a J. Anyway, Josie Pyre is dealing with dementia, this whole thing. And then this becomes a driving force as well behind the familial tension in Pyre's life. She's dealing with dementia. And at one point she tells Jeb that the devil told her to pinch Pyre's wife, Becca. And it's a really, really interesting moment because previously in this very episode, we have Ron writing down his revelations, and we have Dan receiving revelations. We have Onias receiving revelations. That's the voice in their head that they call God. And here we have Josie hearing a voice in her head to pinch Becca, and she says, the devil's trying to tempt me.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, like, these are brain chemicals that do all sorts of crazy shit. Yeah. She was also way anti-Semitic, way racist, way white supremacist, right?
Yeah.
Like, all of these things are manifestations of the same things. It's the labels these different people are using and applying to their brain chemicals.
Yes. And yes, Josh also says, I liked how the mom asked if Idaho Mormons think Utah Mormons have a stick up their ass. Yes, that was pretty funny because they're like,
funny.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah. Absolutely. Let's see. Also,
there was also the part where Brenda, having been given a blessing and trying to bring the Lafferty family back, sends missionaries to the wives. And the missionaries saying that capitalism is part of God's plan. That made me super happy. It funds the church in the last days, so them fighting the government was a bad thing because of capitalism. Oh, that made me happy.
Yeah. Well, this also creates the meeting that Alan and Brenda got with the general authorities, with a Q70, an unnamed Quorum of the 70 who is a recurring character, this old fucker. And we get to see them giving her a blessing, because so she and Alan are in conflict. Then Alan leaves the meeting after vocalizing everything that every ex-Mormon wishes they could say to a general authority. And he tells Becker to leave with him, and tells Brenda to leave with him, and she doesn't leave with him. She stays in the room with the general authorities. And when he leaves the room, she asks them to grant her a divorce. Now, any woman who has tried to get a celestial divorce, get their sealing, nullified, can attest that this is a painful process. This is a multi-year long process with multiple interviews, it is a grind, and it is incredibly abusive. Yeah. And this illustrates, like, Brenda going to the top brass, which you have to do. You have to get a letter from the first presidency granting your divorce. This is her version of going through that. She asks for a divorce, and instead they say, can we give you a blessing?
Yeah.
And in that blessing, they didn't say, we bless you with peace and divine guidance or whatever. They say, you are to shepherd the Lafferty clan back into the fold. Mm-hmm. And at the beginning of the next episode is where I think somebody says that put her on a collision course with Ron and Dan Lafferty.
Right. It's interesting too during the blessing, because the men's hands are all piled on top of each other, which usually it's kind of, they all need to touch the head of the person, and so they're piled all over around the head. They might have their hands sort of like that, but they got to have at least a finger touching somewhere. But that was kind of an interesting point. But you also watch her as her head bends down further and further and further as it goes on, because of the weight of what they're saying to her, which is, stop complaining, stop whining, go out there and bring them all back. And it's your job to do it. If you fail, you will never get anywhere in the next life. That's all that's implied through the whole thing. Failure here is not an option. So stop whining about it and go do what we said. Mm-hmm. And that the abuse, that all of that stuff that's been going on doesn't matter jack shit to them. They don't care. And they never do. Yeah.
Well, okay, yeah. Great question in the chat here, Tyler. Did that actually happen? Did Brenda get direction from the church to bring the Lafferty clan back into the fold? The answer is yes. that did happen. Shannon, you read those comments to me yesterday. Do you want to read those real quick? Because they're, I feel like, really pertinent. If they are shareable, actually.
It was in a different group. It's a private group, but her sister has spoke up about Under the Banner of Heaven a lot, and she was one of the consultants on it. And let me see, I will probably paraphrase what she said. Let me find it.
Yeah, so while she's looking that up, like that in the comments as well, like the women grooming the men for the young boys, their sons, for narcissism, like this is very much is what it can lead to in this. Just commenting on the conversation going on the YouTube chat here.
Okay, Diana wrote the letter. Yes, Brenda helped her, but Brenda also wrote one, and so did Brenda's dad to the first presidency. And then she says the blessings came about 3 months before Ron received his removal revelation. So it wasn't like immediate. When she was given the blessing to go and help them all come back, kind of thing. She says that actually Alan and Brenda both got blessings from the general authorities then, but it only showed Brenda's.
And that was like Q15 blessings like they depicted, or was it like different leadership? Do we know?
She doesn't say.
Very damning if it's straight from the top.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it came from a Q70 in the show. Yeah, I don't know what the actual directive was, but it is, yeah, I mean, anything that was going on with this case, like the Q15 were intimately familiar with, and probably having many meetings about how to handle this and how to keep the church from getting dragged under the bus with everything here too.
Yeah, and it was accurate that Brenda was like, if you don't choose me and your daughter, then I will leave you and I'm going to go live with my grandparents. And this blessing is what made her stay, which I'm like, I wonder if they ever felt a level of guilt over that, because she could have lived if she'd gotten out of there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Great fun. Yeah. So then this is when, Brenda tries to help the Dan and Matilda, because they had gone back to like Mennonite, almost Amish lifestyle, where, you know, Matilda's churning butter in a jar, and like they're living just on this rundown old farm, and they're all in like home sewn, like
totally off the grid,
like their dresses are made from drapes. It's very weird. And she tries to bring them, like she says, they hadn't eaten store-bought butter in weeks, so I was trying to bring them some Sara Lee, and it was cool. And then that's when Matilda shows up at Brenda's house and threatens her with blood atonement, straight up, just stop fornicating. And this is when Ron actually gets his removal revelation. And that's, thus the title of the episode, Revelation. This is
and that's his
swan song.
These people have to be killed. Yeah.
It's the list. Anytime, like truly radical narcissists like this are making a list, like people die, people get hurt. And that leads us into episode 7, the final episode, Blood Atonement, it's titled.
Yeah. So fitting. Oh gosh, what I found interesting is how much of this episode was filmed in the dark. I was like, that's actually really quite good, because so much of all of this happened in the dark. Yeah, but it was,
Julie commented, this episode was cathartic. Yes. I feel like I really needed this episode to not feel very, very just depressed, because the whole show is about religious extremism, and that shit is going on everywhere around us all day, every day. But I feel like the show resolved in such a way that it was palatable and that it was acceptable, that I could take it all in and process it together. And it ends up, oddly enough, sort of being a feel-good story.
I wanted to know what happened with everybody afterwards, though.
Yeah.
I was like, you gotta do that little, voiceover or, the print over or whatever at the end.
Pictures, like the picture of the the actual family, and then the words, something. But we did not get that. Instead, we get everything is coming to a head. The detectives are focusing in on Ron and Dan. They are able to catch the two guys who were just hitching a ride around the country with them, and they.
Thanks to
find
Jacob
out.
bringing in Dan's journal, they were able to get the full names of them and go find them.
Yes, that's correct.
Which
and
Jacob did because that was his Brenda, the person who was good to him, didn't just ignore him.
That's right. And that's a callback to the second scene of the first episode, that he was doing something that she was like, whoa, what's going on? Which was he was mutilating a squirrel, right?
Right.
That's
She wasn't like, stop. It was like, I don't think you're going to be eating that one for dinner tonight.
Yeah. And she she cleaned him up and gave him a cloth to wipe the blood off his hands with.
She used her slip and wiped the cloth off of, or
that's what it was.
The blood off of his hand.
Yeah. So that act of kindness then comes back full circle, and he gives the journal. So yeah, they arrest these guys, and I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised with the treatment of atheism in this show, because I was prepared for it to be like many other interpretations in popular media that atheists are just, it's the scare, right? It's the old satanic panic scare that atheists are evil. And this show, it was amazing that the atheists were the only moral actors in many of the circumstances.
Yeah, I like how Talbot said, oh, well, yeah, they're telling the truth. They have no God to tell them to lie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. And this is where the wisdom of Taba really shined.
Where he's like, the atheist was lying. That's a skill particularly to your ancestors. He says. I'm like, yeah. And I love it that Taba gives the actual story of what happened in the Mountain Meadows massacre. Yes. And I love the scene with the general authority there, even though he's still threatening Pyrie, is when he turns to Taba, is like, oh, you're a Paiute, right? Oh, we have a great history together, and how he just laughs in his face and walks away. And I'm like, that was so good. That was excellent.
Because what do you do?
Paiute too.
Yeah.
He was Paiute too, which was awesome.
Yeah. And I liked it too, because Taba's letting him know, you have no power over me. Yes. None whatsoever. And I think you're ridiculous. Yeah.
Yep.
And so that was good. But also just this point, look, you've got to see the truth. What is it that people are covering up? And his line also, are you the kind of man who would pinch his own baby girl so you can comfort her when she cries? That is the absolute description of Christian God right there. Yeah.
Yep. It's that old meme of Jesus knocking on the door. Let me in so I can protect you from what I'm going to do to you if you don't let me in.
Right.
Yep. And this was there are so many instances and interactions between Taba and Mormons, calling him Lamanite, being very racist to him, and with Jeb and Taba. And one of the notes that I even included in here was on the previous episode, Jeb and Taba were riding in the car together, and Jeb says, I used to love Pioneer Day. And Taba just so many times when Jeb says something racist, Taba just shakes it off. He just looks the other way. He doesn't acknowledge, he doesn't do anything, he doesn't react. He just internalizes it and processes it, and just knows that he has no interest in trying to educate this Mormon boy about what's really going on in the world, because he knows that that's going to be a source of conflict between him and his professional partner. So every time that something comes up, he keeps his mouth shut. It's not until episode 7 where Tabo finally cracks. He finally breaks and confronts Jeb with all of this religious shit that they're dealing with, and all of the history. And that's when we see Mount Meadows depicted from the Paiute perspective.
Right.
And that's where we see Taba, pulling over to the side of the road and saying, you tell me, you talk to that God of yours and tell me where Ron and Dan are. Like, and is confronting him repeatedly about these things that Jeb clearly doesn't have a succinct or a useful answer to, because he's trying to view everything in the goody two shoes Mormon context, and the world doesn't fucking fit into those boxes. And Taba has had it by the end of the series. And finally, this outburst happens that, they pull off the side of the road and just, walk out to a canyon. And Taba is just walking. He's just walking. And Jeb's like following him, like, hey, where are you going? Where are you going? And they finally, like, Taba comes to this precipice.
What the fuck? I was like, excellent. Okay.
So they both break. And now they can both pick up the pieces together.
Yeah.
That's what this needed. This mending together of this friendship so that they can finally see each other eye to eye in all of this, right? And that's when they let's see, where do I have this? I have like Taba is the shit. Taba is bomb diggity. Like, my notes are filled with how awesome Taba is in all of this, right? And it's just all really fascinating, the way that they created Taba's character and how he is able to deal with these Mormons who abide by an unspoken hierarchy structure that he is not privy to and he doesn't care about at the end of the day, and how he is immune from the influence because he doesn't abide by that structure, because he doesn't give a shit about these holy white-haired dudes in the holy white tower of the church office building.
Right.
They don't hold power over him. Fascinating character. And then so they figure out Ron and Dan are in the casino. There's this woman, this escort, who is helping them out and keeping and hiding them, harboring fugitives. They make the arrests.
Okay, sorry. Will brought up something that I was like, oh shit, didn't even think about that. Because when we were watching that, because we watched the last episode today, like 6 hours ago, and when he sat in the car, when Dan sat in the car and said, I am Elijah, I was like, what the fuck is that all about? But Will brought up, and he says, tying it back to Millennial Messiah, Radio Free Mormon posted an old interview of Dan Lafferty where Dan admitted he believed he was an Elijah and said that Elijah was just a title, echoed Bruce R. McConkey's belief that everyone's an Elias. And so I was like, oh, okay, there we go. But okay, yeah. And then Dave Winslow brings up that it's a little more detail, but he says that's episode 244. The audio is Tom Barberi's interview of Dan in 2000. It's chilling. He's remorseless. He also reveals that Alan knew Brenda and Erica were on the list. So yeah.
And Natalie in YouTube is saying the 7th and last episode was everything up and down of emotions. I cried with all the connections, like the gut punch and the atheist being the moral, etc., etc. Yeah, that was the atheist being the most moral ones out of everybody depicted that we've seen here. It was so helpful. I mean, I'm just looking back at the rest of this. Diana goes to rescue Matilda. And that's a fascinating scene where Diana has gone through this absolute roller coaster with her husband, Ron, who, she initially tried to change him, realized he wouldn't change. She runs away with the kids, leaves to Florida, just trying to get as far away from Ron as possible, and then realizes that her sister-in-law is caught up in the situation and has no way out and has to drive to go rescue her. And that, I think, was a really fascinating scene as well. And god damn, wow, there's so much to all of it. Episode 7 really tied it all together. Really, I think took this from being an interesting show to being a really good miniseries and self-contained miniseries. When it comes to Jeb Pyrie, he in episode 6, I believe, is when he happens upon Mormonism, Shadow or Reality. And that's when he goes through his faith crisis. And then we don't get the resolution of the faith crisis. we have the conflict of Becca, his wife, saying that if he can't be a worthy priesthood holder, that she's going to take the kids and leave, and she's going to be married to a worthy priesthood holder, whether that's you or somebody else.
Yeah.
And she asks him to bear his testimony. And there's this really, really tense confrontation that Jeb is trying to hide away from his wife, his doubts, which I know this happens in a lot of Mormon couples.
Yeah.
And he goes out, 2 a.m. or whatever, sits in his car in the garage and breaks open this book and reads it, and he's just crying and sobbing. And then she comes out, finds him out there. And it's like she caught him looking at porn. He is trying to hide it, and he's trying to hide his emotions. And then she realizes that he's going through a faith crisis, in addition to how hard this case is.
Yeah.
And I thought how this scene was depicted was so important, because it showed that Becca realized what's going on. She doesn't have the tools to support him emotionally in this, let alone support herself through her own faith crisis. And the only thing that she has, the only tool set she has to answer his problems with his faith, is bear your testimony. Pray with me, and I want you to bear your testimony in the next fast and testimony meeting.
Yeah.
Which are the worst possible things for her to demand of him at that time. She not only didn't help, she made the situation worse with what she had, with the tools that she had access to help her husband through this. Mm-hmm. And then when she's confronting him later and asking that he bear his testimony, and confronts, like, he recognizes that she needs to feel his attention and his love as a spouse, but he doesn't have the tools equipped in order to express those feelings without the religious context, because she feels like the only way that she can get validation and be seen and appreciated in this relationship is if he expresses fealty to the church, because that is expressing fealty to their eternal family, so that they can go and see their 3 unborn children when they die together.
Right.
So it's this problem where the culture doesn't provide tools to the members to be able to support with each other, to communicate with each other, and to be what the other person needs them to be in a situation that is dire when their marriage is on the ropes. And because of that, the church serves to be the primary source of friction between these two otherwise good and loving spouses.
Mm-hmm.
So that was an important detail. I wanted to bring it up as well.
Yeah, that one was a rough moment. I was just reminded, watching it, of when my husband, everything just finally fell out from under him. But I'd already known that the church wasn't true. This was a couple years after me. But my response was, just talk to me about it. Let me hear it. And that is not that, which is what Jeb needed at that moment. But you are not taught to do that. You are taught to bury it, to stick it on a shelf, to not talk about it, because talking about it makes you be tainted. And so, yeah, that was a tough moment. Of course, another moment that we all enjoyed, I think, was when Diana, when they're at the gas station there in that last one. What I hated, but was like, yeah, that's typical, is when she's begging all the men there for help and nobody did a damn thing. And then what she had to say to Sam, just like, you are not special. You are nothing. And that was such a beautiful moment, and giving Matilda enough strength. I mean, right there, like when Sam pulls her out, he's like, you stole my brother's property. And then he grabs Matilda and takes her off. But for Matilda to stand up strong and break away, because that woman, I think, was the most abused out of all of them, all of the wives, as far as we could see, because so much emotional abuse was given to her. And you could see it from just the first moment you meet her. And it was nice to see her break free like that. I was really proud of her. Diana was an incredibly strong woman. And yeah. So yeah, those are all quite amazing moments. But yeah, like what Dave said, we were taught any faithful man and woman could be a successful family, which is bucket loads of shit. But also, yeah, and he brought up the thing of the general authority shaking the dust off his feet after talking to Jeb and Alan. And it's like that, yeah, that's true, is he just in his mind damned them for eternities. There was nothing else they could do.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
holy
let's
so much fuck. Right.
Yeah, so that was all the 7 episodes. We have a whole bunch of like discussion threads or topics that we could also engage in this also, but like primarily me, but Shannon and I totally monopolized all of this. So like we want to also open up the floor, comments as we've gone through or overall. Yes, please, Tyler. Yeah.
Something that I noticed kind of as the Johnny Depp and the Amber Heard case went on during this was really publicized. I also caught a bunch of like domestic abuse. Clearly it's shown in the show, but something that kind of occurred to me was someone looking kind of from the outside in might see this very transparently as sort of an excuse to behave however they want to. Whereas I feel like growing up, whenever Mormons got brought up when I was Mormon, it was kind of a joke. And I wonder how that would affect someone who had only kind of heard of Mormons as like a kind of goofy, polygamous, associated, just a joke about polygamy, basically, how that would affect them and make them kind of see this is not just a joke for a lot of people. It's really messed up. I wondered how other people would react to that.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Well, yeah, let's discuss the perception of this, right? Because ex-Mormons are going to, just like Shannon and I watching Conference, we paid attention to very different things, right? Like ex-Mormons are watching a very different series than believing chapel attending, but in the pew Mormons, watching a very different series than the rest of the population who know nothing about Mormonism. Right. I'm curious, what are these respective audiences going to think? What are their takeaways?
Yeah, that's a good point. Because really, Mormonism does not look good in this.
No.
Not just fundamentalists, just all Mormonism, because the church is trying to control the narrative in it. But then again, I also am like, should the church ever look good? Is there anything that should be shown as the church looking good? Because that gets so exploited to cover up everything it doesn't look good in. So, yeah.
Right. I feel like it's for the non-believer, the Gentiles out there, no exposure to Mormonism watching this, I think they may come away with the assumption that the corporate Mormonism is far more zealous and vindictive than most Mormons, and I think even most ex-Mormons think it is, because the series draws so many parallels between these radical fundamentalists who are raping teenagers and murdering their family members and the corporate LDS church. The parallels are, they're the same entities, right? This is all built out of this same cosmos of religious entities and religious zealotry, just taking these different forms. It's oftentimes the same language coming out of different people's mouths who believe in different iterations of Mormonism. And I feel like there's very, very little representation beyond just like Brenda herself of like a progressive or nuanced member. And I think that that's a silent majority in the church, is a nuanced and progressive believer who have a gay kid and they don't necessarily adhere to the more conservative or even the more radical tendencies that the church tends to breed. But the show isn't made about those people. This is a show about ritualistic murders. This is a show about religious extremism. And if we are looking for religious extremism within Mormonism, we can just as much turn an eye towards any of the recent mass shootings that are motivated by racial and religious animus. It's not just Mormons who do this. It is many different religions who have these radical actors within them, that it's not just Mormonism that breeds dangerous men, but religions breed dangerous men.
Yeah.
So hopefully people can come away with the assessment of like, wow, holy shit, how pervasive is this in evangelical communities, in Catholic communities, in Muslim communities, in any other communities. It's not just the Mormons who have these psychotic actors within them.
Mm-hmm.
I think we got to wait till it shakes out, though.
Yeah.
I did think that they're kind of, you can't really avoid this in a TV show, but this whole thing throughout it, there's like one scene where the Relief Society looks good because they're kind of helping out when Jeb is gone. And the rest of the show, every Mormon group is very, especially the Salt Lake Church, they're always, like you said, vindictive and aggressive.
Yeah.
Where my experience in the church was day in, day out, most of the time, it was like focusing on Jesus and how nice he is and that sort of stuff. And then they kind of throw in 1 in every 10 sentences or whatever, these sort of coded or vindictive type things. So it's kind of woven in like that. And it's not so up in your face.
Right.
So I wonder how this would contrast with someone meeting a regular Mormon and like, oh, they're not murderous people. That's crazy. I can't believe they actually have brains in their heads and seem like they're trying to do their best. I wonder how much of a shock that would be if someone had never been a Mormon and they came across this way.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah.
Anybody else who wants to can chime in too.
I think a lot of TBMs are not going to watch it, because they're scared of it. They see the ads showing the temple thing. They don't want to see that because of everything. But also, I think what comes through on this very much is the control the church has on you is over how much is only as much as you believe in it. If you believe in the next life, if you believe in this whole celestial kingdom thing, then their control is absolute. But that once you lose that belief, their threats don't make any sense, don't have any effect on you. And that is an underlying feeling that I got through it. And so that's something I actually would be curious about with any TBMs who see it, is what will happen a year from now if something feels weird, because there's so much with people putting their doubts on a shelf, and the doubts from this will go on a shelf. They're going to try to forget about it if they did watch it, like what Will says. But if they stick it on their shelf, it's still there in their brain and they're still going to remember it. What's going to happen then?
Willem, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I have 2 comments. The first one is, I empathize a little bit with the church, and what I mean with that is you've got all these like fucking weirdos in your church, and you can't let them find out that you're not the one who's got claim. I mean, there's no claim. Nobody has claim, right? I mean, like we know that. Everybody here knows that nobody has claim to authority. But like the members don't know that. And when they go to the BYU library, like Ron and Dan Lafferty did, and they find out that the Mormonism that they've been raised to believe in the the corporate church is not the right church, and then they go out and they're like, holy shit, this is wrong, but I still believe in Joseph Smith, because they don't connect the dots that it's all fucking false.
Right.
They latch on to Joseph Smith, and they find out that the church went over here, so they get all excited and they go that way. There's like a part of me that's like, oh my god, like, did they do the right thing to try to like all the even the media like tampering, like they try to clamp down on the the press and the buzz about about it today because they don't want people going down that path. Are they doing the right thing? And I don't know the answer to that. That's one thought that I have.
Yeah.
The other thought that I have is, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I would have never met or known about Brenda had she lived. Erica would have been, I don't know, 39 this year.
Mhm.
Wish they were still around in a way. As we remember them, it's almost like we are keeping them around. Yeah, I'm just getting emotional about that. So
Yeah.
I don't know. The church is in a rough spot, and I empathize with them a little bit on that regard, but fuck them.
Yeah.
That's how I feel.
That's fair.
That makes sense. It's, yeah, I figured too. When I knew this was coming up, I was hesitant about it because I thought if they treat it like with Murder Among the Mormons did and go nice on the church, I'm going to be really pissed and I'm not going to want to watch it.
Yeah.
But when the church put out the announcement that they same one that they did for the Book of Mormon musical, I was like, okay, that's a good sign here.
Oh, yeah.
That they're going to be portrayed the way they were. And so that made me super duper happy. So, but that is the thing, is it's going to be there. It's going to be in people's brains when they see it. They'll watch it on the sly later, kind of like what Jeb did with that book, the Tanner book of Mormonism Unveiled, reading it on the sly where he couldn't be seen. And that has an effect over time. And so that's a good thing. It's painful to watch, but I think it's also good to know this is part of the history here. This is an important part of the history. We've had a few really vicious killings in this state, and that I've referenced before on an episode, like the Hi-Fi murders and stuff like that. But this is the one that's religiously motivated, in the last 50 years kind of thing. So, God, yeah.
I'm kind of, oh, go ahead, Rick.
Something Will said, in terms of how a believing Latter-day Saint would view this, it brought back a memory of a conversation I had with my mother, who passed away in '93, so it's been a long time. And I mean, she was a fifth generation Mormon. Her grandfather once sat on Joseph Smith's lap and all of that stuff. And I just sneaked a little comment in and I said, Mom, I've been studying in some of these old books about the lectures on faith. Did you know that in the early 1830s, the church was teaching that God the Father was merely a spirit and that his Son had a body, but that the Holy Ghost was just the emanation of the two other members of the Godhead? And her reaction, a temple worker, was, why, how could Joseph Smith have made such a mistake? And the point is that these systems become such an integral part of the brain that it's almost impossible even for the fallen prophet to disengage a person from it. In other words, it's so deeply internalized that it helps us understand how in the wrong hands these extremist groups can wield so much power.
Wow. Oh my.
I think that contributes more to the thesis of the show and of the book, that Mormonism breeds dangerous men, right? It provides a toolbox for people to use, and it is the same toolbox for the nuanced, Mormon 2.0 believer who votes, progressive every time, as it is for the most radical, McCranky and Cleon Skousen readers, right? With basements full of food provisions and guns. That's the same tool set. These Mormons have the same things to work with in order to interact with the world around them. Now, most chapel attending Mormons are never going to have any need to use those tools, those more dangerous tools. The story of, I'm so glad they had the Laban story. They had a brief allusion to the Laban story, and I think it was episode 6 or 7. I'm so glad it was in there because it's so important, because it's something that every Mormon knows, and it's the first story that everybody picks up on, because it's the first story people remember from the Book of Mormon. Laban, sacrificial killing. Nephi, the good, righteous God boy, killed a drunk guy to steal from him. And that's a tool that is provided to all Mormons, regardless of whether or not they ever use that tool. It is available to them. And I think that is what creates the prospect of these tools being used dangerously. Yeah, exactly right, Rick. And in that vein, I'm kind of curious, and this is a point that was brought up to me by Christina Rossetti, that in what characters are Mormons going to see themselves? Because I know that some Mormons are going to be watching this. Hopefully some younger Mormons are going to watch this, more impressionable people who are more open-minded to being presented information like this. What characters are they going to see themselves in? Because the hope is that they're going to see this good detective Jeb Pyrie. He's such a good, faithful Mormon. He has this really hard situation that causes him to have a faith crisis, and then he navigates these things, but he's still like at the end of it all, he's still a good guy. He's still a stalwart guy. But then she said, how many Mormons are going to see themselves in Ron and Dan? And that's kind of a scary prospect to me. How many are going to see them and be like, wait, maybe the Salt Lake Church is in apostasy. Maybe I need to go learn some of these more fundamentalist tracks. Maybe I need to see what's going on in these other groups that have been suppressed by the church, have been persecuted by the church.
Right.
Yeah, and it's a lot scary because the fundamentalists are more consistent with scripture, and so
Yeah.
They believe in the fundamentals.
Yeah.
I have a relative who left the church. Kind of her final blow was that they advocated for the COVID vaccine, and she's a super Trump supporter type of that realm. And that same thought kind of came up, was like, man, I hope she never thinks that going down that sort of path would be a good idea, because I could see that appealing to her.
Scary. That's scary.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's, I get, like, artists don't have any control over how people interpret the art and the messages they take away. They have influence, but not total control. And that leads me to question, like, and wonder, like, how useful is this as a storytelling mechanism that causes people to inwardly reflect? If it's going to cause X percentage to inwardly reflect and say, yeah, I think Ron and Dan had it right all along. Yeah. I don't know. That's a conundrum. That's something that doesn't have any easy answers to it.
Right.
Let's see. Yeah, so those are the majority of the conversation types or points that we have here. But one more thing to hit on, I think, and Shannon, you were talking about this at the end of when we were talking about episode 7 before we got into the overall panel discussion, but property, women being property. This is something that hits over and over and over and over again. And even the most stalwart protagonist treats his incredibly good, faithful, and kind Mormon wife like she's property.
Yeah.
It's difficult.
Cognitive dissonance abounds.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. All right. So
Can I make a comment? Natalie from the YouTube chat says, is it really true that more people are leaving the church for the fundamental side of the church? Does anyone have any data or anecdotal
rather than
about
history and stuff? Yeah.
more compared to what?
Rather than for over like gospel topics and history and that. Because I mean, the history would be kind of the fundamentalist side of the church, but that's a good question.
Yeah, who knows? Yeah, because I can't imagine that more people are leaving the church and going into these than just leaving the church. But
or are they just leaving the church because it has such because the fundamentalist issues of them, and finding out more about fundamentalists who are based in the Joseph Smith side of the church and Brigham Young for that matter.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a good question, actually. That'd be something to look into.
Definitely.
Oh.
Yeah. So anybody else want to chime in with some overall thoughts? We've been going for, a solid 2.5 hours here. I figure we'll probably wrap this up pretty quickly here. But yeah, does anybody want to chime in? Final thoughts, overall thoughts about the entire series, maybe about the book, how the book compared to the series. The floor is yours. All right, then.
Or do you want to talk about Jane Austen? You knew I'd say that.
Wait till the next Patreon segment for that, I think.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
No.
So I think that does it for our overall review of Under the Banner of Heaven. My overall takeaway is I think the series is done well. It deals with a lot of information and a lot of history and does so, I think, in a good way that is an accessible story for anybody, regardless of Mormon or Gentile or fundamentalist or corporate Mormon. I feel like it's a story that everybody can come away with some like of the same themes altogether. And I think it's really good. And and Dave mentioned Sunstone. I'm looking forward to Sunstone when they're going to have a bunch of panel discussions about this. And there will be a whole lot of, hopefully historians chiming in on how accurate and inaccurate the things are, and as well as the book and criticisms of the book, that it was too broad and too general. Same thing happens for the show. But I think overall, my assessment is that the show is good. The show is useful. The show is impactful. And I hope that it's going to hit some Mormons the way the South Park episode did, that they're not expecting it. And they watch it and it's like, whoa, this is actually a lot more information than this is a shelf breaker item. And I can hope that it will be a shelf breaker for some people in the time to come. But I guess we'll just kind of have to see. So for everyone who tuned in from patreon.com/glassboxpod, we appreciate you being our fantastic financial supporters of the show. Shannon and I really appreciate that. And thank you for tuning in and joining us on the live stream here, or for listening back to it after the live broadcast. Thank you for being supporters of the show. And also thank you for all the people who tuned in on the YouTube and kept the conversation going over there. That was a lot of fun as well. So I guess until next we speak, Godspeed. Is that how that goes? Something like that. Something like that. Yeah. All right. Well, take care, everybody.
Good night, everybody.